All right, this video is going to demonstrate the entire end-to-end process for the portal setup for a resident. There was no one on the call today, so I decided I'd just do this video to cover all the points that likely would have come up. So I'm going to start where everyone should start, which is the email that was sent on Friday afternoon. I think it was around 12:15. It was actually, sorry, 12:17. So if you go into that email and read it, you'll be able to, we'll work through this together. So there's a deadline of October 20th, and we're planning to cut over currently on October 26th. I know that sounds like a long ways away, but it's not, and there are going to be issues along the way for residents and others. So the sooner we can get this stuff done, the better off we're going to be. So I'm going to start by opening the resident guide, just like it says here, and I'm going to do that by right-clicking, and I'm going to open it in a new tab. So now I have my email up in one tab, and I have the resident guide up in a second tab. And you can see this guide, and here is the table of contents. And I'll get back to that in just a minute. So let's go back to the email. It says, the guide provides step-by-step instructions on using the portal. And if you follow these steps carefully, the process should go fairly smoothly. So that's what we're going to do. So the first step is to log in. Okay, so it says refer to the Getting Started section of the guide to retrieve your credentials and log into the portal. It says for the initial setup, we recommend using a browser on a computer or tablet rather than a phone. You're welcome to use a phone later on, and you can use the app on your phone, but for this initial setup, it's probably just going to be a little easier on your computer. So I'm going to go to the guide, and I'm looking for the Getting Started section. Okay, so if I go over to my guide, at the very top of the table of contents, it says Getting Started. Note it says the priority for initial resident setup is highlighted in yellow. So there's Getting Started, logging in using a browser. There's adding a visitor registration in yellow. There's adding a vendor registration, and there's updating notification preferences. These are the four things that the email asks you to do. Also in the table of contents, it says if you click on this up here where it says to the top, it'll return to the table of contents from any page. And also you can click on the section you want to go to. So I first want to go to Getting Started, and that's exactly where it takes me. There's a orangish yellow box here, and it's important. It says in the new system, each resident has their own account rather than the existing shared account structure. So in Dwelling Live, you all log in using the same user ID and password and go to the same place. In this system, you each have your own user ID and password. And so if there's a husband and a wife and somebody else who want to access the system, they can each have their own user ID and password. You will all see basically the same information. The only difference will be the My Info information, which we'll go through later, which will be unique to each of you, your email, your phone, and such. There is both a web interface that we're going to use today as well as a portal, or excuse me, an app. And for those of you who are comfortable using apps, feel free to download that on your phone or tablet. The next section after logging in using a browser down here is logging in using the app. So that you can read through that and know what you're looking for when you go out to your app store to download that. Okay, so the first thing it says to do is to right-click on this link. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to right-click on it, and I'm going to open it in a new tab. Okay, so now I have the guide in one tab, and I've opened this page. This is the login page for the VisitForm portal. And note it says you need a resident code and a PIN, which you don't currently have. So how do you do that? Well, if we read the directions here, it says for first-time logins, click Request Credentials at the bottom of the login page. Enter your first and last name along with your email address. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to click on Request Credentials. I'm going to enter my first and last name, and I'm going to enter my email. Okay, and then I'm going to hit Send Request. And if all goes well over here in my email, I'm going to get a notification, and momentarily. There it is. What does it say? If I go into that email, I can see that I have received from VisitForm a portal credentials. Now I'm not going to click on that because I don't want to open it up and show everybody my username and password, but it will give you both your resident code and PIN. And so I'm going to enter my resident code and PIN now. So for me, I'm not going to say it out loud, and when I save this movie, I will hide it, but I entered mine. So you should have a 9-digit resident code and a 4-digit PIN, and then you hit login. And that gets you into the system. So we've actually completed step 1. We've logged in, and each resident can do this at a lot, the husband, the wife, whoever. As long as your email and cell phone and name were submitted during the onboarding process. If they weren't, you can send me an email and I can add a new resident. Okay, so let's go back now to the email where I was earlier, which I left. Apologize for that. HOA training. I want to go to here. So we logged in. Now, step 2, set notification preferences. Well, it says refer to updating notification preferences section of the guide to configure how you'd like to receive notifications for check-ins, vendor check-ins, visitor check-ins, and package delivery. So I need to go to the guide and find the updating notification preferences. So I'm going to jump over. Now I said earlier you can just hit go to top and it'll take you back here. And I already showed you down here, one of the 4 is updating notification preferences. So I clicked on it. And it took me to that section. It says open the My Info page. Okay, well, let's do that. I'm going to go to My Info. I can click over here in the text menu, or I can click here on the icon. Okay, it takes you to here. Let's see, what does it say to do next? It says click the Notifications tab, and it has a little icon here with a bell. So I'm looking for a bell, and tabs are usually at the top, and there it is. It's a little Notifications tab. So these are your notification settings. Well, what are your choices? You can receive notifications via text or SMS, email, or push messages. Push messages only apply if you're going to install the app on your phone or tablet. Now, in my case, I have it set up for push messages because I don't like to be annoyed by emails or text messages, so I get regular notifications. Many people like text messages, and so you could certainly check those. So check the selection or selections you want. I mean, you could get all 3 if you really like getting a lot of notifications, but I would suggest that's probably not the best idea. Then you can decide, well, what do you want notifications about? Well, do you want to know when visitors check in, when vendors check in, when you receive a parcel? It says mail. You won't get notifications for your mail, but you will get notified when you receive a package. And turned away, frankly, is not something we're doing currently with the system, so that's functionality we haven't enabled. So really you need to decide which things you want to be notified about. Now, I want to be notified when visitors come in, when vendors come in, and if I receive a package at the gatehouse. So I have all 3 of those turned on, and I have this the last one turned on as well, so that when it does get activated in a future phase, that will be set, and then you hit save. And that's it, really. That's all you need to do is just save those settings and you've completed step 2. So now let's go back to the email. Now we're getting to the interesting part. Step 3 is actually 2 steps, add visitors and add vendors. Okay, so the new Gatehouse system makes a clear distinction between visitors and vendors. Visitors are guests who are coming for non-work related reasons. Typically, that's friends or family, and maybe a few others, but typically that's the bulk of it. Vendors are everyone else. They're all the people that come to your lot to do work of some kind. And so you need to enter them under the appropriate category. Okay, so it says refer to adding a visitor registration and adding a vendor registration section of the guide. So I'm going to go to those. Now it also says watch this video for adding a vendor registration. If you click on this, I'm going to do a right click again and open the link in a new tab. And there it is. And here is a video. Now I'm going to stop it. I urge you to watch that video. It's going to walk you through similar to what I'm about to do. Okay, so I wanted to go back now to the resident guide. I'll go back to the top. And I want to go to adding first a visitor registration, excuse me. So let's follow the directions. Open the visitors page by clicking visitors. Okay, well, let's do that. So first thing, I can either hit visitors over here, or if you want, you can click over here and go back to your icons. Either will take you to the same page. This time I'll click over here, visitors. Now I currently have no visitors set up in the system, and neither will you, but you need to add them if you have them, especially those that are permanent visitors, like children or people you play pickleball with or what have you, whatever those visitors are. It says, then click on the floating add button located in the lower right corner to begin a new visitor registration. Well, there it is, the big blue circle that's there sort of floating on the page. I'm going to click it. And this is going to be quite familiar. It's pretty straightforward. You first have to say, what is the duration of this visitor? So by default, we've set this up as temporary, where it starts on the current day, the day you're going to create the registration, and goes for 1 week. Either of those dates can be changed. So if you're going to have a visitor come for 3 weeks during the winter, and they're going to come, say, on the 24th of November, and they're going to stay through the 15th of December, which probably is about as long as you want them to stay, you could put in those dates, or it could be a permanent, no dates, that they'll be able to get into the community until you delete it, until you delete this registration. So I have a friend who comes up here quite often, and his name's Chris Adamson. So I'm going to enter his name. Now that is all you have to do. That's the minimum you have to do to enter a visitor. You could also enter their cell phone. I don't know his off the top of my head. Let's imagine that's it. And you could also enter a comment. Friend who visits frequently. Now, the cell phone and the comment are really directed at the gatehouse. If something came up for whatever reason and they needed to contact this visitor while they were here, or for whatever reason, they'd have that contact number. And they'd also know that, hey, he's just a friend of lot 16 in my case. And then you just hit save. And there it is. So now I have a new visitor, Chris Adamson, permanent. I can click on it if I ever want to make updates. I can do that. You know, if I decide I want to make it temporary, I can go make it temporary. And then to go back, I can go here without saving it. So that's it. That's adding a visitor. I'm done. And you could continue to obviously add additional visitors. By the way, you can also, once it's here, you can also go in with a little trash can up here and delete a visitor. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that because I don't want it in the system. That is all described as well in the user guide under updating or deleting a visitor registration. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to the top to the very last step, and this is the most new and potentially the most complex step with the new system, but the steps are there for very good reasons. If you had spent the last 4 months looking at the data in our old system and some of the issues we were having around the guards and check-in and notifying residents when vendors arrived and so forth, you would understand why some of these things are the way they are. So I would say trust us at this point that in order to remedy those, we needed to do something dramatically different. And so this is what we've done. So I'm going to go to adding a vendor registration. Now, at the very beginning, it reminds you again, please watch the video below before adding your first vendor registration. You should be getting, sort of clued in that, hey, this is different. I probably should watch the video, and I should also read through the directions carefully the first time. Once you do it once, like most things, it'll be fairly straightforward for you, but that first time will be different. So I'm going to go through step by step. Step 1, open the vendors page by clicking the vendors icon. So that's just like the visitors. So let me go back home, and I'm going to click on vendors. Now, when vendors come up, everybody except for 1 or 2 lots will have pre-existing vendors in their list. These will typically be exterminators, landscapers, pool service, and house cleaning. It was fairly easy in many cases, or most cases, to determine in the old system who your current vendors were for those services, and most people had at least 3, if not all 4 of those services. So we went ahead and added those as permanent vendors, so you did not have to. If any of those are added mistakenly, just like with a visitor, you could go and delete them, or you could edit them, right? You could go in, this one's still permanent, you could edit it and you could change, for example, the employee. So I'm not going to go through that right now, but you could. Let's assume they're all correct, and now you want to add a new vendor. Just like with visitors, you click the plus in the blue circle at the bottom. But now the page looks different, well, sort of different. Let's start at the top. We're going to add the duration first. So I'm going to let this vendor be temporary, and I'm just going to put them in for a week from today through the 13th. So I'm just going to use the default. Now, you would probably, your instincts are, well, I just want to start typing the vendor's name. That's sort of right. But what you're going to be doing is you're going to be selecting a vendor out of what we call the vendor catalog. This is a catalog that's actually about 1,460 vendors right now. And hopefully yours is in there already. If it's not, I'll show you how to add a new one and explain that process. But first of all, let's start with one I know is in there. So let's suppose I was going to add, next week I'm having a company come to install shades throughout my house. And I know the name of that company is Gallery of Shades. So I'm just going to start typing the name, Gallery. And I've only put in 4 letters, and already I can see Gallery of Shades. So once I find it, I would select it. Let's do a slightly different one. Let's do Arrow Exterminating. Now this one's different because there are lots of employees. So I'm going to go with Arrow Exterminating. But let's imagine I knew, on the other hand, so I've been typing in vendor names. What if I knew the name of the employee? So for most of us here in Glenmore, if you use Arrow Exterminating, and now I've actually drawn a blank on his name, so apologize here. His name is Eric Ramos. So let's say you couldn't find the vendor. Well, let's type Ramos. And when I get to here, I can see Eric Ramos, and it searches and finds that. So you can search by the name of the company or by the name of the employee. So let's go back to Gallery of Shades. So once I find it, I just click on it. I hit next. I then can select an employee. Now, depending on what data we had in the old system, there may be a list of employees here, such as Arrow Exterminating. Or if it's a company where no names were listed, it just says staff. It's certainly acceptable just to hit staff and hit save. So that's going to add Gallery of Shades and staff. Now let's imagine, on the other hand, I did know the employee's name. Well, I could actually create a new employee from here. So let's imagine their name is Joe Cochran. Just made that up. That's all that's required. If you do know their phone number, I urge you to add it so that we can keep that information in the system. Once again, it's helpful for the guards, potentially, and it may also be helpful down the road for other residents. But I'm just going to save Joe Cochran right now, and then I'm going to hit save. And so now I've created a new vendor registration for Gallery of Shades with staff as the employee for 1 week. And that's sort of the simple case. That's the basic case when you can find your vendor in the vendor catalog. Now the question is, well, what happens if I've searched the catalog and the vendor is not there? Well, you click on a new vendor down here. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to create a new, I'm just going to call it new vendor. You should put in the exact corporate name. So let's imagine the name of the company is Super Duper Ice Cream, okay? And they're going to be coming for a birthday party. And so what do? Well, they're providing food. Well, let's call it, so this is now the type. You have to add a type. And there are, at this point, 52 different types you can select from. If there is no type that you think is appropriate, you can always pick other. But in my case, Super Duper is really bringing food, some good food actually, some ice cream. So I'm going to put them under food delivery. And the third thing that's required for a vendor is a phone number. And I'm going to make up a phone number, 406-222-0987. Okay, that's the minimum required. If you know an employee name or you know the URL for the company, you can enter those. But I'm just going to create it. It will take you then to this page where you can review what you entered. You could also at this point add additional employees. So let's say you knew 2 or 3 employees that were coming to do a significant amount of work at your home over a longer period of time, say a subcontractor, you could add those here. But at this point, I'm going to keep it where it is, and I'm going to hit save. And so now I've added this to the catalog. Now, while I'm here, I might as well show you this. The catalog can be accessed from this second tab. This will show you all of the vendors currently in the system. So if I now type super, well, there it is, Super Duper Ice Cream, and the only other vendor with SUPER in their name is Superior Grout and Concrete Company Pumping. So this is the one, it's been added. Now notice though it has a hollow or white briefcase as opposed to the dark filled briefcase that most of the other companies have. So if I go back a little bit, you can see all these other companies are blue. That is distinguishing between what we call approved vendors and an unapproved vendor. So Super Duper Ice Cream was added, but it has not yet been approved. It gets approved by either me, the administrator, or by the guards. But since the guards aren't using the system yet, it gets approved by me. So in the next 3 weeks, I will see these fairly quickly and I will approve them. And once they're approved, you can then access them in the system. So I'm going to actually pause the video here. I'm going to jump over, approve this one, and then come back. Okay, I just actually updated Super Duper Ice Cream. And actually, let me go out of here and then I'll go back because it just needs to do a quick refresh. So now I've approved Super Duper Ice Cream. You can see in the catalog. So I'm going to go back here. And now I want to add Super Duper Ice Cream. And now it's going to be just like before. Super, select it, go next. I'm just going to pick staff and save. Okay. So there's two things when you're dealing with vendors. One, if it's in the system, it's very straightforward. You hit the blue circle, you search for it, you select it, select an employee and save it. If it's not in the system, you go new vendor, you add the appropriate information, you save it. I will then see it, and at this point, I don't think it's taken me more than 20 minutes. Usually if it's during normal day hours, it's fairly quick. I'll approve it, and then when you come back, it will be there. And in many cases, I'll send you an email letting you know it's approved. So that's the process. Someone would probably at this point ask, well, why are we doing this? Well, in the prior system, even within a single lot, we had vendors spelled 3, 4, 5 different ways. Or we might have a company that does painting that was just called Painter. And so there was no way of knowing anything. So we needed the official corporate names, which we now have and have some controls around. And secondly, imagine a vendor like Arrow Exterminating, which is servicing at last count 22 different lots in our subdivision. Each resident, each lot was entering that in different ways. And so when Arrow came to check in, the guards were like, okay, well, tell me what lots you're going to. And then they had to go lot by lot and find what was the entry for Arrow Exterminating, which could have just been Exterminator or Arrow Pest Control or what have you. Now it's well controlled. And when a vendor like Arrow shows up, the guards basically say, hey, Arrow's here. They enter Arrow and they get a list of all the residents who use Arrow. And we can do that now because you all have selected the same vendor. Before, that could not be done. So we've made the guard process hugely more streamlined and easy, and it will also guarantee that residents all get notifications. Whereas now, it's likely if you're checking in, Eric Ramos to service 10 lots, that some of those lots get missed, right? They don't actually get registered. There's no notification sent. So it's going to improve that register or check-in process for vendors for the entire community. And yes, it takes a little getting used to because it's different, but actually it's easier. You just select the name. And the only awkwardness is creating a new vendor, but we already have a catalog with close to 1,500 vendors. So the chances are yours is in there. And once a new one's added, it's available to everyone, right? And so the next resident that uses that vendor, it'll be there. So it's just something that's going to get better and better and better over time as we maintain it. And hopefully the controls are kept in place and we don't get duplicate vendors and things like that. And that's the reason for the approval process. We want to make sure that this vendor that a resident has entered in this process isn't actually already in the system. And we want to make sure the information is accurate, that that vendor's name is correct, that their phone number is correct. And then I've been adding URLs because most residents don't do that. And so we're building this catalog. Now, when I mention this catalog, what am I talking about? Well, that's back to where I was just a minute ago. But let's go just to the example I used earlier, gallery of shades. You can now, as a resident, click on this. And when you do, not only do you get the name of the company and the type, you get their phone number and their URL. So I can literally click on their URL and go straight to it. So we're building this catalog that's going to make finding vendors easier and easier. So you'll be able to look in the catalog, and what you're going to see are vendors who've been to our community before that have been used by residents. So you've got a certain degree of, well, I know somebody else has used them. And over time, we can even do things like say, well, over the past year, how many residents has this vendor actually serviced? And so on and so forth. So there are a lot of potential uses. You can also, in the catalog, and I haven't really talked about this, you can go in and filter by a category. So say, for example, you're looking for babysitting. Well, currently we have 3 vendors in the system who provided babysitting services. So you could go to Busy Bee Babysitting and you have their phone number and their URL, and you could go look them up and maybe get a babysitter if that's what you need. And the same is true for all of the other vendor types that you could go and search on. Now, to give you a sense, though, if I go to cleaning, well, if I search on cleaning, the list goes on and on. It's alphabetized here. It should keep going. I think it stops at a certain point. You're going to have to actually filter on letters because we have like 160 different cleaning vendors. So that gives you also a sense of how many different vendors of certain types we have. So that's really it. I think now if we go back here, I not only went through the things in the email, I added a few extras just because I got going. But you need to log in, update your notification preferences, add visitors if you have any, and confirm your vendors and add new ones. And as I said, you will have vendors to start with that we've added, but many of you had other vendors listed in your account, but we had no idea. Some of them were from years past. Some of them maybe visited 3 months ago, one time. We had no idea whether they should be added or not. And so you need to do that as the startup process. So that's it. Lengthy, but that's what we would have covered on the call. So I kept it long.